The water turned to fire at dawn. 51 ships were moving through the Bismarck Sea, slow and heavy, loaded with soldiers who didn't know they had 12 hours left to live. 7,000 men, 51 vessels. No one thought they could be stopped. The Japanese commanders called it a reinforcement mission. Simple, direct. They'd done it before. Move the convoy from Rabaul to La Haye, unload the troops, turn around. The route was known. The escorts were ready. 8 destroyers surrounded the transports like a steel fence. But someone was watching. 8 B-25 Mitchell bombers were flying low that morning, so low their propellers almost touched the waves. They weren't carrying regular bombs. They were carrying something the Japanese had never seen before. A tactic so brutal it would turn escort duty into a death sentence. The pilots had been practicing for weeks. Not high-altitude precision bombing, not dive attacks. Something else. Something that required them to fly at mast height, straight into anti-aircraft fire, with no room for error. They called it skip bombing. And in 15 minutes, it would erase an entire convoy. The morning of March 3rd in 1943 started quiet. The convoy had left Rabaul the night before, steaming northwest under cloud cover. The weather was bad, which the Japanese liked. Clouds meant Allied planes couldn't find them. Clouds meant safety. But the clouds were breaking. At 10 a.m., the first reconnaissance plane spotted them. A single aircraft, circling high, just watching. The Japanese destroyers opened fire, but the plane stayed out of range. It didn't attack. It didn't leave. It just watched. That should have been the warning. By 10:15, the convoy was fully exposed. 51 ships in neat rows, moving at 8 knots. Slow, predictable. The destroyers stayed close, their guns ready, scanning the sky. The transports were packed. 7,000 soldiers of the 51st Division crammed into holds designed for cargo. They were supposed to reinforce La Haye, a critical base on the northern coast of New Guinea. Japan was losing ground there, slowly, steadily. This convoy was meant to stop that. But the Allies knew it was coming. Intelligence had been tracking Japanese movements for weeks. Codebreakers had intercepted messages. Reconnaissance flights had confirmed the route. The only question was how to stop it. Standard bombing wouldn't work. High-altitude attacks against moving ships had a failure rate above 90%. Torpedoes required planes to fly slow and straight. Suicide against destroyers with that much firepower. So they tried something different. A month earlier, a handful of B-25 crews had started experimenting. They removed the Bombadou station from the nose of the plane and installed 8 forward-facing machine guns, 50 caliber Brownings, mounted in a cluster, all firing at once. Then they practiced flying at wave height, releasing bombs not from above, but from the side, skipping them across the water like stones. It was insane. Flying that low meant anti-aircraft gunners didn't have to aim up. They could fire straight ahead. It meant no time to react if the plane stalled or if a wave caught the propeller. And it meant the bombs had to hit perfectly, skipping at just the right angle to strike the hull below the waterline. But if it worked, the bombs would punch through steel that high-altitude munitions couldn't touch. The crews practiced on wrecked ships off the coast of Australia. They practiced until they could put a bomb through a target the size of a door from 200 feet away while flying at 200 miles per hour, 6 feet over the ocean. And then they waited. The convoy was spotted at 10 a.m. By 10:30, every available bomber on the northern coast of New Guinea was in the air. 13 B-17 Flying Fortresses went up first, heavy and slow, their bomb base full. Behind them, 12 Australian Beaufighters armed with torpedoes. Then the B-25s, 8 of them, flying in 2 groups of 4, loaded with 500-pound bombs with delayed fuses. The Japanese saw them coming. destroyer lookouts spotted the high-altitude B-17s first. The convoy scattered, ships breaking formation, zigzagging to avoid the bombs. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky. Black clouds of shrapnel exploded around the American planes. The B-17s dropped their payload from 20,000 feet. Most of the bombs missed. A few hit. One transport took a direct strike and started listing. Another caught fire. But the convoy kept moving. The destroyers kept firing. The formation tightened again. The Japanese commanders thought they'd survived. Then the B-25s came. They didn't come from above. They came from the horizon. 4 planes in a line, flying so low the Japanese gunners couldn't depress their weapons fast enough. The machine guns opened up first. 8 Brownings per plane, all firing at once. 32 streams of 50 caliber rounds tearing into the superstructure of the lead destroyer. Gunners fell. Bridge windows shattered. Crew members dove for cover. And then the bombs dropped. The first B-25 released at 200 feet. The bomb hit the water, skipped once, twice, and slammed into the hull of the destroyer Shirayuki just below the waterline. The delayed fuse gave the plane time to pass. Then the bomb exploded. The explosion blew a hole the size of a truck through the hull. Water poured in. The ship lurched to one side. The second B-25 targeted a transport. Same approach, same result. The bomb skipped across the calm water and punched through the thin skin of the cargo vessel. 3 seconds later, the blast ripped through the engine room. Steam vented from every opening. The ship began to sink. The third and fourth planes hit another destroyer and a transport. 4 ships in 4 passes. And the B-25s weren't done. They circled back. The Japanese were firing everything. Machine guns, anti-aircraft cannons, even rifles. The sky was full of tracers. But the bombers kept coming, one after another, too fast and too low for the gunners to track. A second wave of B-25s arrived at 11 a.m., then a third. By 11:15, the convoy was chaos. Ships were burning. Some were sinking. Others were trying to run, but there was nowhere to go. The destroyers tried to form a defensive screen, but they were outnumbered, and the bombers could attack from any direction. One transport, the Kyokosei Maru, took 3 hits in 2 minutes. The first bomb opened the hull. The second ignited fuel stores. The third detonated in the troop hold. 700 soldiers were below deck. Survivors said the ship sank in less than 4 minutes. The destroyer Tokitsukaze tried to close the distance, firing at a B-25 as it made its run. The bomber didn't pull up. It flew straight through the anti-aircraft fire, released its bomb, and kept going. The bomb hit. The Tokitsukaze's bow exploded. The forward magazine went up 3 seconds later. The ship broke in half. By noon, the water was covered in burning oil. Smoke rose in columns that could be seen from 50 miles away. Wreckage floated everywhere. Pieces of ships, cargo crates, life rafts, bodies. The convoy had ceased to exist. 51 ships had left Rabaul. 12 made it back, and only 8 of those were combat capable. The rest were on the bottom of the Bismarck Sea or burning on the surface. Thousands of men were in the water, clinging to debris, struggling against a current. Some had life vests, most didn't. The Japanese destroyers tried to rescue survivors. They pulled men from the water, packed them onto decks already crowded with wounded, but the bombers came back. Every time a destroyer stopped to pick up survivors, it became a stationary target. The B-25s attacked again. The destroyers had to choose: save the men in the water or survive. Most chose survival. By the afternoon of March 3rd, the attack slowed. The bombers were out of ammunition, the fighters were low on fuel, but the damage was done. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea lasted 3 days, but the convoy was destroyed in the first 3 hours. What followed was cleanup. Allied planes returned on March 4th and 5th, hunting stragglers, strafing lifeboats, finishing off damaged ships that were limping toward Leh. It wasn't mercy. The pilots had orders. No Japanese reinforcements could reach New Guinea. Not the ships, not the men. By March 5th, the sea was empty. Estimates vary, but most sources agree that between 3,000 and 3,500 Japanese soldiers died in the battle. Some drowned when their ships went down. Others burned in the oil fires. Some made it to lifeboats only to be strafed by fighters or left adrift when the destroyers abandoned them. Fewer than 1,000 reached land. The 51st Division, which was supposed to reinforce Leh, never arrived. The troops that did make it ashore were scattered, exhausted, and without equipment. No heavy weapons, no supplies, no vehicles. Leh fell 4 months later. The Japanese Navy lost 4 destroyers and all 8 transports. More than 50 aircraft were shot down or damaged trying to defend the convoy. The Imperial Japanese Army lost an entire division's worth of combat power in a single engagement. And the Allies lost 5 planes. The disparity was so extreme that Allied intelligence initially didn't believe the reports. When reconnaissance flights confirmed the wreckage field, analysts thought it was a trick. No one had ever seen a convoy destroyed that thoroughly, that quickly. But the tactic worked. Skip bombing became standard doctrine for the Pacific Theater. B-25s across the theater were retrofitted with nose guns and trained in low-level attack techniques. Over the next 2 years, the same method sank hundreds of Japanese ships, cargo vessels, destroyers, even cruisers. But the Battle of the Bismarck Sea was the proof of concept. The commanders who planned the convoy assumed air superiority didn't matter if the weather was bad. They assumed destroyers could protect transports. They assumed moving quickly and staying under cloud cover would be enough. They were wrong. The Allies proved that air power could destroy naval forces without ever engaging them at sea level. That planes, if used correctly, were more dangerous than submarines or surface fleets. That a handful of modified bombers flown by crews willing to risk everything could change the outcome of an entire campaign. And Japan couldn't adapt fast enough. After the Bismarck Sea, Japanese convoys moved at night. They used smaller ships. They spread out formations. But it didn't matter. The Allies had figured out how to sink ships faster than Japan could build them. And every convoy lost meant fewer troops, fewer supplies, fewer chances to hold a defensive line in the Pacific. The men in the water didn't know any of that. They didn't know their deaths would change doctrine. They didn't know their convoy was the test case for a tactic that would be used for the rest of the war. They just knew the planes kept coming. One survivor, a Japanese soldier named Takeo Yamashita, was pulled from the water by a destroyer on March 4th. He later wrote that the worst part wasn't the bombs or the fire. It was the sound. The sound of the planes circling back. The sound of the engines getting louder. The sound of men in the water realizing there was no escape. He said the sea was so thick with oil that it didn't look like water anymore. It looked like black glass reflecting the smoke. And when the oil caught fire, the glass turned red. Men swam through flames. Some made it. Most didn't. Yamashita survived because the destroyer captain ignored orders and stopped long enough to pull 20 men aboard. Then the captain saw the bombers turning back and ordered full speed. The ship left the rest behind. Yamashita said he could still hear them screaming when the destroyer was a mile away. He was one of less than 1,000 who made it back to Rabaul. The battle didn't just kill soldiers. It killed the idea that Japan could resupply its forward positions. Leh, Salamaua, Finnshafen, every base on the northern coast of New Guinea was now cut off. The troops there could fight, but they couldn't be reinforced. They couldn't be resupplied. They could only hold as long as their ammunition lasted. And when it ran out, they died. The Bismarck Sea was the beginning of the end for Japan's New Guinea campaign. Within 6 months, the Allies controlled the coast. Within a year, they controlled the interior. The 51st Division, which was supposed to turn the tide, was at the bottom of the ocean. But the impact went beyond New Guinea. The battle changed how both sides thought about air-sea warfare. Japan realized that moving troops by sea in daylight was suicide. The Allies realized that air power, if used correctly, were more dangerous than submarines or surface fleets, and that the skip bombing tactic that won the battle became a template. Modified bombers, low-level attacks, overwhelming firepower. It was used in the Philippines, in the Dutch East Indies, in the South China Sea. The B-25 crews who flew that first mission didn't know they were making history. They were just trying to stop a convoy. But the method they proved worked became doctrine. And that doctrine sank more Japanese tonnage than submarines did in some months of 1943 and 1944. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea lasted 3 days, but the convoy was gone in 3 hours. 51 ships to 12. 7,000 men to less than 1,000. It wasn't the biggest naval battle of the war. It wasn't the longest, but it was one of the most one-sided. And it proved that the age of the battleship was over. Air power decided naval engagements now. And Japan, which had built its navy around massive surface fleets, couldn't compete. The men who died in the Bismarck Sea didn't know that. They didn't know their convoy was the turning point. They just knew the water was on fire and the planes kept coming. The reports reached Tokyo 3 days later. The high command didn't believe them at first. Losing an entire convoy wasn't supposed to be possible. Destroyers were specifically designed to defend against air attack. 8 of them, coordinated with overlapping fields of fire, no bomber group should have been able to penetrate that. But the reconnaissance photos didn't lie. 51 ships had left Rabaul. Fewer than 15 returned to any port. The rest were debris. The Imperial Japanese Navy launched an investigation. They wanted to know what went wrong, how an entire reinforcement operation protected by destroyers and covered by fighters had been annihilated in broad daylight. The answer was simple. The Allies had changed the rules. Traditional naval doctrine said aircraft attacked from above. Dive bombers came down steep. Torpedo bombers came in low but slow. High-altitude bombers dropped from safety. All of these approaches gave defenders time to react, time to maneuver, time to fire. Skip bombing gave them none of that. The B-25s came in fast and flat, below the angle most anti-aircraft guns could depress. By the time gunners saw them, the bombers were already releasing. And by the time the bombs hit, the planes were gone. There was no counter. Destroyers couldn't outrun the bombs, they couldn't maneuver fast enough, and their guns, designed to fire at aircraft thousands of feet up, couldn't track targets 30 feet off the water moving at 200 miles per hour. The Japanese tried to adapt. After the Bismarck Sea, convoy routes shifted. Ships moved at night. Formations spread out to reduce the damage from a single attack. Fighter cover increased. But it wasn't enough. The Allies had found the formula. Fast, low-level attacks with modified bombers carrying delayed fuse bombs. It worked in the Bismarck Sea, and it kept working. In April 1943, a similar attack destroyed a convoy near Wewak. In June, another convoy was hit off Bougainville. By the end of the year, Japan had lost more than 200,000 tons of shipping to skip bombing attacks. And every ton lost was a ton that couldn't reach the front. The soldiers fighting in New Guinea, the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, they all depended on supplies from the home islands. Food, ammunition, medicine, reinforcements. When the convoys stopped arriving, those soldiers starved. By late 1943, Japanese troops in New Guinea were eating grass and tree bark. They had ammunition for 1 firefight, maybe 2. Wounded men died from infections because there were no antibiotics. The 51st Division would have changed that. 7,000 fresh troops, thousands of tons of supplies, enough to hold Leh for another 6 months, maybe longer. But the convoy never arrived, and Leh fell. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea didn't just sink ships, it severed a supply line. And in war, severed supply lines kill more men than bullets do. The psychological impact was just as bad. Japanese sailors stopped trusting convoy duty. They knew what happened in the Bismarck Sea. They knew the planes would come, and they knew that destroyers couldn't stop them. Morale collapsed. Captains refused orders. Crews deserted. By mid-1943, Japan was struggling to find enough men willing to crew the transports. The ships that did sail moved at night, hugged coastlines, avoided open water, and they still got sunk. The Allies had air superiority, and they used it. Reconnaissance planes tracked every convoy. Bombers hit them before they reached their destinations. Submarines finished off the survivors. Japan's merchant fleet, which had been the backbone of its war effort, was bleeding out, and there was no way to replace the losses fast enough. By late 1944, Japan was building ships slower than they were sinking. The Bismarck Sea was the beginning of that collapse. It wasn't the only cause. Submarine warfare, mining operations, and strategic bombing all contributed. But the Bismarck Sea was the moment the Allies proved they could destroy convoys at will. And once that was proven, Japan's logistics network fell apart. The men who flew the mission didn't think of it that way. They were just trying to stop a convoy, sink some ships, maybe slow down the Japanese advance. But the tactic they used rippled outward. It changed training, it changed doctrine, it changed how air-sea engagements were fought for the rest of the war. And it saved lives. Every Japanese soldier who didn't reach New Guinea was a soldier Allied troops didn't have to fight. Every transport sunk was a battle avoided. Every convoy destroyed was a base that couldn't be reinforced. The Bismarck Sea was one battle, 3 days, 3 hours of intense action. But the consequences lasted years. Historians argue about the exact numbers. Some say 3,000 Japanese died. Others say closer to 4,000. A few claim the number was higher, that men were never recovered, that men drifted for days before drowning or dying of exposure. No one knows for sure. What is known is this: the 51st Division never reached Leh. The convoy never delivered its cargo, and Japan never tried a daylight reinforcement run in that area again. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea proved that air power could defeat naval power, that bombers, if used aggressively, could control sea lanes, that modified tactics, practiced relentlessly, could turn a risky idea into a war-winning strategy. And the men who died in the water, burning in the oil fires or drowning in the dark, they became a lesson. Not because their deaths were unique. Thousands of men died in similar attacks throughout the Pacific, but because their deaths were the first proof that the new tactics worked. Skip bombing wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real, it was repeatable, and it was devastating. The Bismarck Sea turned theory into doctrine, and doctrine into history. The Allied pilots who flew that mission didn't talk about it much afterward. There were no parades, no medals for most of them. A few received commendations, but the battle itself was classified for months. The tactics were too valuable to risk the Japanese learning the details. So the crews went back to their bases, refitted their planes, and did it again. And again. By the summer of 1943, skip bombing was standard. New crews trained on it, manuals were written, techniques were refined. But the men who flew the first mission, the ones who came in at mast height over the Bismarck Sea with no idea if it would work, they knew what they'd done. They'd flown into anti-aircraft fire so thick it looked like a wall. They'd watched bombs skip across the water and punch through steel. They'd seen ships break apart and men jump into burning oil. And they'd done it at 200 miles per hour, 30 feet above the ocean, with no margin for error. One mistake, a stall, a misjudged wave, a piece of shrapnel in the wrong place, and they would have joined the Japanese in the water. But they didn't make mistakes. They made history. The B-25 Mitchell, the plane that carried out the attack, became iconic because of missions like this. It wasn't the biggest bomber, it wasn't the fastest, but it was versatile, and crews loved it. You could mount guns in the nose, you could fly it low, you could modify it for almost any mission, and in the hands of pilots willing to push it to the edge, it was lethal. The Bismarck Sea proved that, but the battle also revealed something else, something darker. War had become industrial. The convoy wasn't destroyed by a single hero or a brilliant general. It was destroyed by a system. Reconnaissance planes tracked it, code breakers intercepted its route, bombers practiced the tactics, crews executed them. It was efficient, clinical, brutal. The Japanese didn't lose because they made a mistake. They lost because the Allies had better intelligence, better tactics, and better execution. And there was no defense against that. Japan tried. They rerouted convoys, they added escorts, they improved anti-aircraft defenses, but the Allies adapted faster. When Japan moved convoys at night, the Allies used radar. When Japan spread formations out, the Allies sent more planes. When Japan added fighter cover, the Allies coordinated attacks, bombers and fighters together, overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers. The Bismarck Sea was the template, and once the template was proven, it was repeated until Japan's merchant fleet was gone. By the end of the war, Japan had lost more than 8 million tons of shipping, tankers, transports, cargo ships, destroyers. Most of it sunk by air attack, and much of it sunk using tactics refined after the Bismarck Sea. The men in the water didn't know they were part of that. They didn't know their convoy was a test case. They didn't know the tactics that killed them would be used again and again until there were no convoys left. They just knew the planes kept coming. The survivors, the ones who made it back to Rabaul or washed ashore on small islands, they carried the memory. Some refused to talk about it. Others told the story obsessively, trying to make sense of what happened. None of them could explain why they survived and others didn't. Luck, positioning, a piece of debris that floated, a destroyer captain who stopped when he shouldn't have. Survival in the Bismarck Sea wasn't about skill or courage. It was random, and that made it worse. One soldier later said the hardest part wasn't the attack, it was afterward, floating in the water, surrounded by bodies, watching the destroyers leave. Knowing help wasn't coming, knowing the planes might come back, knowing that the war would continue and their deaths wouldn't change anything. He was wrong about that last part. Their deaths changed everything. Not because they were heroic or tragic, though they were both, but because their deaths proved a point. Air power was the future. Navies could no longer operate without it. Convoys could no longer move without it. Battles could no longer be won without it. The Bismarck Sea was the proof. And the lessons learned there shaped the rest of the Pacific War. American forces used those lessons at Leyte Gulf, where airstrikes crippled Japanese carrier groups. They used them in the Philippines, where convoys were destroyed before they could land reinforcements. They used them in the South China Sea, where Japan's oil supply was cut off. Every one of those operations owed something to the Bismarck Sea. Not because the battle was large, but because it was first. First proof that skip bombing worked. First proof that modified bombers could sink destroyers. First proof that air superiority could isolate an entire theater. The Japanese knew it too. After the war, captured documents showed that Japanese naval commanders had identified the Bismarck Sea as the turning point for convoy operations. They knew even in March 1943 that they couldn't protect their ships anymore. But they kept trying, because they had no choice. Japan's empire was spread across thousands of miles of ocean. Every base, every outpost, every garrison depended on supplies from the home islands. If the convoy stopped, the empire collapsed. So they kept sending them, and the Allies kept sinking them. By 1945, Japan's merchant fleet was functionally extinct. The ships that remained were hiding in ports, too damaged or too valuable to risk. The soldiers on isolated islands were starving. The factories at home had no raw materials. The war was already over. It just took a few more months for Japan to realize it. And it started in the Bismarck Sea. 51 ships, 15 minutes of bombing, thousands of men dead, and a tactic that would be used for the next 2 years to strangle an empire. The pilots who flew that mission didn't know they were making history. They were just doing their job. But their job changed the war. If you or anyone in your family served in the Pacific, tell us about their story in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from: US, UK, Australia, Japan, or anywhere else in the world. If this story mattered to you, consider subscribing. There are more like it.